I never thought the blood of my own blood would look me in the eye and tell me I didn't belong in the very house I built with my bare hands. My knees almost gave out when I heard my son, my only son, say, "Dad, it's theirs now. You'll understand someday." Theirs, as in his wife's family. Strangers. People who never lifted a stone or hammered a nail on this property. People who never once spent a night working double shifts to pay for the bricks, the tiles, the land. I stood at the gates of the villa that had been my life's work, and watched as his wife's brothers carried in boxes laughing, while her mother walked through my halls like she was the queen of a castle, my home, my sacrifice. And my son? He just stood there with his arms folded, pretending this was normal. I wanted to scream, to rip the deed right out of his hands, but all I could do was stand frozen, my heart cracking inside my chest. He didn't just take my villa. He ripped away my dignity, my identity, my place as a father. But what he didn't know was that the man who raised him in sweat and sacrifice was about to raise something else, a storm he would never forget. I wasn't always an old man with tired bones and a quiet house. No, once upon a time I was just a boy with nothing but dreams too big for my empty pockets. I grew up poor, so poor that sometimes dinner was nothing more than bread dipped in watered-down soup. My father left when I was young, my mother struggled to keep food on the table, and from the moment I could carry a load, I was working. Factories, farms, odd jobs, you name it, I did it. I learned early that if I wanted anything in life, I would have to bleed for it with my own two hands. When I became a husband, I thought life was finally offering me some sweetness. My wife, Clara, had a smile that could soften any hardship. But fate, cruel as it always is, took her from me far too soon. A sudden illness, one hospital visit, and just like that, she was gone. I was left with our baby boy, Michael, cradled in my arms as I stood at her grave, swearing I would give him the life she dreamed of for him. I was just in my 20s, already widowed, already broken. But I had a son now, and that meant I couldn't break completely. Raising him alone was never easy. There were nights I came home from the factory so exhausted that I could barely keep my eyes open, yet I still stayed up to rock him back to sleep when he cried. I learned to cook, not because I wanted to, but because he needed warm meals. I learned how to braid his shoelaces, patch his clothes, and even braid his hair when he was little. He'd giggle at how clumsy my hands were. Every scraped knee, every fever, every parent-teacher meeting, it was me. Just me. Money was always tight. There were times I skipped meals so Michael wouldn't go hungry. Times I worked double shifts and walked home in the snow with my shoes soaked through because bus fare was too much of a luxury. I can still remember wrapping my jacket around him on freezing nights when the heater broke, telling him bedtime stories until his little body finally stopped shivering. He'd look up at me with those big eyes and whisper, "Dad, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." And in those moments, every sacrifice felt worth it. I never remarried. I couldn't. My life was devoted to him. Every extra penny went into a savings jar. Every raise went straight into a fund for his future. I denied myself new clothes, a better car, vacations, everything, just so Michael could have what I never did. While other men my age went out drinking or chasing women, I stayed home helping him with homework, attending his school plays, and clapping the loudest even when he only had a small role. When he wanted to play baseball, I sold my old wristwatch, one of the few things I had of value, to buy him a glove. When he wanted to join a school trip, I worked a weekend shift unloading trucks to pay for it. His joy was my joy. His dreams were my dreams. I told myself, as long as he's happy, I don't need anything. There were moments of pride that carried me through the darkest days. The time he brought home a drawing of the two of us, stick figures holding hands under a big house with a red roof. "That's us, Dad," he said. "That's the house I want us to live in." I pinned it to the wall, and every day it reminded me of what I was working for. That dream became my obsession, a home. Not just any home, but a villa. Something permanent, something beautiful, something that could be his inheritance. I started putting every spare dime into a separate account. While other fathers bought new televisions, I patched up the old one. While they upgraded their cars, I fixed mine with duct tape and prayers. I kept my eyes on the bigger prize. The day I signed the papers for the land that would one day hold the villa, I cried like a child. I still remember holding the keys, pressing them into my palm until they left marks, because I wanted to feel that it was real. Every brick laid, every tile polished, I was there. I didn't hire contractors for everything. I picked up a hammer myself on weekends, sweating under the sun, because I wanted to say, my hands helped build this. And when it was finally finished, standing tall and proud, I felt like I had built a kingdom not just for myself, but for him. Moving into that villa was the happiest moment of my life. I carried Michael, then still a boy, over the threshold on my shoulders, laughing as he shouted, "This is ours, Dad. We have a castle now." We didn't have fancy furniture, just second-hand chairs and old rugs, but we had walls strong enough to keep us safe. I would sit on the porch at night, watching him chase fireflies, and think, Clara, I did it. I gave him what we promised. The years passed, and I watched him grow in that house. Birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, late-night talks in the kitchen over mugs of hot cocoa. It all happened within those walls. That villa wasn't just cement and wood. It was my life story carved into every corner. When Michael went off to college, I worked even harder to pay his tuition. I'd eat instant noodles while sending him enough money for books and living expenses. I told myself, education will give him the wings I never had. And when he graduated, I sat in the crowd with tears streaming down my face, clapping until my hands hurt. When he brought Emily home, I welcomed her with open arms. I cooked dinner, pulled out the best wine I had been saving for years, and told her she was already family. She smiled sweetly, and I thought, good, he won't be alone anymore. I gave them the master bedroom after they married, telling myself I was just a guest in my own home now, but I didn't mind. All I ever wanted was for him to feel loved, safe, and respected. I thought my sacrifices were seen. I thought my devotion was remembered. I thought the villa was a symbol of love and security, the one thing no one could ever take from us. But what I didn't know was that the very walls I built with love would one day echo with betrayal so sharp it would pierce deeper than any knife. It didn't happen in one blow. It began with whispers in my own kitchen. Emily stood by the stove and said, "This place is dated, don't you think?" Michael chuckled like it was harmless. I smiled and said I liked it just the way it was. She glanced at the cabinets like they offended her. Her mother started visiting with a tape measure. Her father tapped the walls with his knuckles like he owned them. I told myself they were just being helpful. I told myself this was family now. One evening, Michael came home with a folder. "Dad, we should talk about streamlining bills," he said. "Streamlining?" I repeated, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Yeah," Emily added. "It's better if we put some things under one name." I asked, "Which things?" "Utilities, maybe the insurance," Michael said, not meeting my eyes. He slid papers across the table. "Just sign here. It just allows me to help manage things." I hesitated, then I remembered every night I'd stayed awake rocking him to sleep. I signed where he pointed. After that, small changes became rules. I was told not to use the living room after 8 p.m. I was told to keep the TV volume down because it bothers our guests. Their guests slept in the bedrooms I painted with my own hands. My photo frames disappeared from the hallway overnight. When I asked where they went, Emily said, "They make the place feel old." I swallowed my anger like bitter medicine. I told myself respect would come back if I stayed quiet. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself Michael would see me. Emily's brothers started bringing boxes. They tracked mud across the porch I had scrubbed every Sunday. They laughed too loudly and drank on the steps like it was a bar. One of them tossed his shoes onto my staircase. I picked them up and placed them by the door. He smirked and said, "Relax, old man. It's just a house." Michael didn't say a word. Silence is its own kind of betrayal. It rings louder than shouting. It cuts deeper than any insult. I woke up one morning to the sound of drilling. A locksmith was replacing the front door lock. I stood in my robe and asked, "What's going on?" Emily folded her arms. "We're upgrading security." I held up my old key. "Will this still work?" She smiled without warmth. "We'll get you a new one." I waited the whole day. No new key came. That night, I fell asleep to the fear of being locked out of my own home. I kept my cell phone under my pillow like a lifeline. The next week, they hosted a dinner. Neighbors I had known for years came in carrying desserts. I stood at the door with a tray of tea. Emily took it from my hands and whispered, "Don't hover." I was asked to sit at the end of my own table. Her father took my chair at the head. Michael raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he said. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, but my hands shook. After the guests left, I found my toolbox in the garage moved. My name, which I had written in black marker, was scratched out. "Who did this?" I asked. Emily's brother shrugged. "Didn't like the clutter." Michael looked away again. I felt a weight settle in my chest like a stone. I went to my room and closed the door quietly. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. They looked smaller than I remembered. They looked unnecessary. Then came the meeting. "Dad, sit down," Michael said at the kitchen table. Emily sat beside him with a stack of papers. Her parents stood behind them like a wall. I sat across from my own son and folded my hands. "What is this?" I asked. Michael cleared his throat. "We've been talking. The villa is too much for you." My heart dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "Too much?" Emily leaned forward. "You deserve peace, a smaller place, less stress." Her mother nodded slowly, like I was a fragile child. Michael pushed a paper toward me. It was a lease agreement for a small apartment across town. "Just for a while," he said. "I'm not moving," I replied softly. Emily's father sighed. "He's being stubborn." Michael's jaw tightened. "Dad, this is for your own good." "For my own good?" I repeated, hearing my voice crack. I remembered his fevers, his homework, his college bills. I remembered selling my watch for his baseball glove. I looked at his hands, steady, unlike mine. I asked, "Whose house is this?" Emily smiled the way a knife smiles when it catches light. "It's ours," she said. "Ours," I echoed. Michael finally looked me in the eyes. "Dad," he said, "it's theirs now." The words struck like a blow to the ribs. I couldn't breathe for a second. I stared at him, waiting for a laugh, a joke, a correction. None came. Only silence, and the sound of my heart thudding in my ears. I reached for the papers in front of them. They weren't just leases. They were records. They were transfers. My name had been replaced in places that mattered. I saw my signature where I'd never signed. I recognized the loop in the J of my first name traced from an old check. My hand began to tremble. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Emily said, "Don't make it dramatic. Shock is cold. It's a winter that starts inside your chest." My lips felt numb as I tried to form words. "This is my house," I said. Emily's mother replied, "You're old. You don't need this much space." Her father added, "Think of the bigger picture." I looked at Michael, begging without words. "Dad," he said softer now, "it'll be better this way." "For who?" I asked. No one answered. Humiliation followed the shock. They had done this in my kitchen, at my table, under the roof I built. I felt small in a place that had once felt like a kingdom. I stood up, and my chair scraped the floor too loudly. "Please sit," Emily said, like scolding a child. I sat because I didn't trust my legs. Tears came to my eyes, and I blinked them away. I would not cry in front of them. I swallowed and tasted metal. I said, "You could have asked." "Ask?" Emily scoffed. "We've been hinting for months," Michael said. I remembered every hint, like cuts that didn't bleed until later. I remembered the locks, the dinners, the rearranged furniture. I remembered the laughter on the porch and the missing keys. I remembered the words, streamlining bills. I understood the trap I had stepped into. I had trusted him. I had trusted love to protect me. Love had been used against me. Disbelief came next, heavy and stubborn. I picked up the papers again and tried to find a loophole with my eyes. I traced my name as if I could erase it by touch. "Michael," I said, "tell me this isn't what it looks like." He looked so young in that moment, and so far away from me. "Dad, please," he whispered, "don't make this harder." "Harder," I repeated, a laugh catching in my throat and dying there. "I built this with my hands." He said, "I know." The neighbors saw me leave the next day with a small suitcase. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd come back after they cooled down. Emily's brothers popped open a bottle on the porch as I walked past. One of them raised the glass to me in a mock toast. "Thanks for the villa," he said under his breath. Heat rose to my face. I kept walking. I didn't want them to see me break. I broke anyway, just not where they could see. Back in the cramped apartment, I sat on a sagging bed. The walls were thin, and the window stuck when I tried to open it. I put my keys on the table, and realized they no longer matched any door that mattered. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Dad, give it time." I stared at the words until they blurred. Time doesn't heal theft. Time doesn't fix betrayal. Time only stretches the ache. I turned the phone face down. Sadness settled like dusk. I missed my porch. I missed the sound of my steps on my own hallway. I missed the creak of the floorboard near the kitchen and the way the morning light hit the staircase. I missed the framed drawing Michael once made of a red-roofed house. I wondered if they'd thrown it away. I pictured it in a trash bag with other things that mattered. I closed my eyes and saw Clara's smile. "I did it," I had told her once. Now I whispered, "I lost it." I went back to the villa 2 days later. I just wanted to look at it from the sidewalk. The new lock gleamed. A security camera blinked like a watchful eye. Emily's father was mowing the lawn. He waved like a neighbor waves, not like family. "You can't be here," he called over the engine. "This is my house," I said, louder than I meant to. He cut the engine and wiped his forehead. "Not anymore," he said, and turned his back to me. Anger ignited. It started low, then climbed like fire up dry wood. I felt it in my jaw, in my fists, in my spine. I remembered the contracts. I remembered the day I signed blind. I remembered Michael's eyes avoiding mine. Anger lifted my chin. Anger straightened my back. Anger warmed the cold places shock had left behind. I whispered to myself, "Enough." But I didn't shout it. The final blow came in a single sentence. Michael called that evening. "Dad," he said, voice careful, "please, don't come by without telling us." "Us," I repeated. He cleared his throat. "It's theirs now." The words landed differently this time. Not as a knife, but as fuel. I stared at the wall of the apartment. I counted my breaths until my hand steadied. I said, "I hear you." He mistook my calm for surrender. He didn't hear the promise behind it. He didn't hear the storm forming in my silence. He didn't know that grief had finished its turn. He didn't know that disbelief had burned away. He didn't know anger had taken its place at my table. He didn't know I had kept every receipt, every bill, every proof. He didn't know I remembered every face who saw me build that house. He didn't know I wrote my name not just on paper, but into brick and beam. He didn't know that the old man he erased still had a spine of iron. He would learn. That night, I opened the drawer where my documents lay. I laid them out on the table like a map. I found the lines where my life had been crossed. I found the places where trust had been turned into a weapon. I found the mistakes I made. I found the doors I could still open. The apartment was quiet. The city outside hummed like a distant machine. I placed my hand on the deeds, the bills, the photographs, and I felt the anger settle into focus. Betrayal had stripped me of my home, but it had not stripped me of my memory. It had not stripped me of my will. It had not stripped me of the truth. They took my walls. They took my keys. They took my chair at the table I built. They tried to take my name, but they forgot who gave them the roof over their heads. They forgot who taught them to stand. I turned the phone back over. I looked at Michael's last message again. Give it time. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. Time was exactly what I would use. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to prepare. Because the worst part of betrayal isn't the fall. It's what you rise as afterward. And I was done falling. I was done asking. I was done being quiet in rooms I built. I was done being told to sit at the end of my own table. I blew out the lamp. The room went dark. My resolve did not. I lay down and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come easily, but resolve did. By morning, my shock had cooled into a hard, clear edge. My sadness had drained into a steady, pulsing purpose. My disbelief had been buried beside the boy who drew red roofs. Only anger remained, shaped and sharpened. Not the kind that breaks things. The kind that builds a plan. The kind that takes back what was stolen. The kind that makes thieves speak truth in rooms with judges. I brewed tea with steady hands. I drank it down and tasted iron and ocean. I packed a small bag. I put the documents in a folder. I put the folder under my arm like a shield. I looked around the apartment once. It was bare, but I wouldn't be here long, not if I had anything to say about it. I picked up my keys. They were useless for the villa. They would open other doors. And I was ready to knock. I sat in the garden that I had once built with my bare hands, staring at the walls of the villa that had once echoed with my son's laughter when he was a boy, the same walls that now mocked me with silence. Every brick in that house held a piece of my soul. Every tree in the yard had been planted with love and patience, and now, suddenly, I was nothing but a guest outside of it, like a stranger in my own home. I tried to swallow the pain, but it rose in my throat like fire. His words kept replaying in my head. It's theirs now, Dad. Not ours, not mine and yours, but theirs. He had given away what I spent my life building, as if my blood, sweat, and tears were worth less than a handful of dust. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling in the small back room where I'd been pushed aside, listening to voices from the main hall, voices of his wife's family, laughing, feasting, and celebrating inside my house. I heard them clinking glasses, praising my son, calling him generous, a true man, and I felt something twist inside me. Generous? No, he wasn't generous. He was a thief, handing over something that was never his to give. And yet none of them saw me. None of them even remembered that without me, that villa would not exist. I was invisible in my own story. I thought back to the nights I worked double shifts, the days I went hungry so he could eat, the winters I shivered because I couldn't afford both heating and new shoes for him, and I always chose him. And now, this. He hadn't just taken my house, he had spoiled it on every sacrifice I had ever made. For days I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he's confused. Maybe it's just temporary. Maybe he'll realize the weight of what he's done. But every time I saw him smiling with his in-laws, parading them through the halls, boasting about the villa as if it had fallen from the sky, my hope died a little more. And then came the night that broke me completely. I walked into the living room to ask for some quiet, only to find my seat, the old chair I always sat in, occupied by his father-in-law. My son looked at me, smirked, and said, "Dad, why don't you sit in the kitchen? There's more space there." My hand shook as if someone had poured ice through my veins. The kitchen. My own son was telling me to leave my chair in my own house so that a guest could be comfortable. I stood there frozen while his wife giggled and whispered something to her mother, and they both looked at me like I was an old, pitiful relic. The laughter stung me more than any slap could. I forced myself to turn around and walk away, but inside, something snapped. That night, alone in the back room, I stared into the mirror. My face looked older, more broken than ever, but in my eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fire. I whispered to myself, "Enough. Enough of the humiliation. Enough of the disrespect. Enough of being treated like I don't matter." Grief was replaced by anger, and anger turned into something sharper, determination. My son thought he could erase me, hand over my life's work to strangers, and bury me in silence. But I wasn't going to die quietly. No. If he thought he could betray me and get away with it, he had forgotten who raised him. He had forgotten the man who built this house from nothing. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my skin, and I swore to myself right then, they will regret this. Every single one of them. They will remember whose house this is. And my son, my own blood, will learn that betraying me was the greatest mistake of his life. That vow became my heartbeat. Revenge wasn't just a thought anymore. It was my destiny. I began not with fireworks, but with a notebook. The notebook was small and battered, the kind I'd used for shopping lists and work orders for decades. I carried it everywhere. I wrote dates, names, conversations, every awkward phrase, every missing key, every hint I had been given. The plan started as a ledger of betrayal. Then I turned it into a map. I circled places where the cracks were widest. I listed people who might still remember the truth. My first move was patience. Revenge is not a shouted promise. It's a slow, cold thing. I waited. I watched them make mistakes. I watched Emily's father slip into bets he couldn't pay. I watched her brother brag in the wrong room. I watched Michael sign papers without looking. Every mistake was a thread I could tug. Then I reached out for allies. Not the kind you find on television, quiet people who owed me small favors. Mr. Khan from the hardware store, who had watched me buy nails for years. Mrs. Abbas, the neighbor who once fed my son when I was at work late. An old colleague, Samir, who had gone into law and never forgot my kindness when I bailed him out of a payless week. I did not tell them my whole plan. I told each only what they needed to know. To Mrs. Abbas, I mentioned the locksmith who changed the locks. She remembered because her cousin had the same locksmith. To Mr. Khan, I mentioned the dates of construction. He flipped through his old receipts and found the one I thought had been lost. To Samir, I whispered the outline, "There may be a way to challenge the TIA answer." He said, "Bring me everything." Meanwhile, I built small traps of truth. I let a rumor slip in the market about someone fudging signatures. I left a document on a neighbor's bench where a curious brother-in-law might see it. The brother-in-law picked it up and took it home. He mentioned it to his friends over drinks, proud of being first to find gossip. Those friends had phones and mouths. The rumor traveled faster than I expected, but I never spoke loudly about my intentions. Instead, I collected quietly. I requested copies of bank statements under the pretense of needing them for taxes. The bank clerk recognized me and helped, because I had once lent him money during a hard week. I found billing records showing large transfers to unfamiliar accounts. I matched those transfers against dates when Emily's family visited. I found inconsistencies in signatures, slight loops and slants that did not match mine. I photocopied every page, double-checked every crease. I planted suggestions with neighbors, little nudges that made people look twice. Funny, isn't it, I'd say, how copies of signatures can look different when you're not careful. Some laughed, some frowned. But eyes began to linger on Emily's family with a new curiosity. Small cracks turned into questions. Then I used the one resource they hadn't thought about: memory. I walked to the old mosque where I had taken Michael as a child. The imam remembered weddings, visits, faces. He remembered the day I first signed for the land. He signed a statement about who had been present the day of the final mortgage payment. Statements added like stones began to form a pile that could not be ignored. I sat with Samir in his cramped office and laid the pieces out on the desk like a jigsaw. If their transfer was fraudulent, he said, we can petition to have it voided. I asked, but will the court listen to an old man's memories? He smiled. It isn't just memories if you have paper to back them up. I spent nights cataloging receipts and calls and old photographs. I found a photograph of me and Michael at the foundation ceremony, tools in hand, smiling like fools with hope. I got that photo enlarged. I put it in an envelope and left it at the local council office with a note for anyone researching property provenance. Then I started quietly recording conversations when people volunteered information. Not in a way to break the law, but where public statements could be preserved, something someone said in a market, a boast at a wedding, a threat in a group chat. Each recording, each public quote, built a chorus that would hum at trial. I also found a quieter resource: time. I let them feel secure, confident that the villa and the deed were theirs. The more blithely they celebrated, the more careless they became. Their guard dropped at family gatherings. They left invoices on tables. They bragged to friends about how easy it was. I read those boasting posts and printed them. I backed up every email and message that hinted at their ownership. Then, I set a small bait. I arranged for a friendly real estate agent to ask about a quick valuation, as if a distant buyer were interested. The agent came to the villa and mentioned minor structural concerns to the father-in-law in passing. The father-in-law overreached, promising to fix them with money he didn't have. He boasted about the planned renovations to the wrong neighbor. That neighbor had a camera and a memory, and now a note in my growing file. I learned to use the community as a subtle witness. People had their loyalties. They also had their eyes. If my son and his in-laws were foolish enough to reveal their true colors, the town would remember. But I kept one card hidden, one piece I didn't show even Samir yet. I tucked it away in a bank box with 2 locks, paper and patience. Whenever they flaunted their victory, I smiled like a patient clock that knew when to strike. They had no idea the storm had a center, and I was its eye. Let them celebrate. The house of cards was still standing, but I held the final gust. The day I set my plan into motion, I walked past the gates of the villa that used to be mine, no longer carrying bitterness in my chest, but something colder, sharper, resolve. For weeks I had watched them grow comfortable, smug even, living under the roof I had built with my own hands, as though my sacrifices were a forgotten myth. They redecorated the walls. They threw loud dinners in the garden. They even boasted to neighbors that it was their family estate. My son's wife preened like a queen. Her parents strutted like nobles. And all the while I kept silent, gathering every document, every legal string, every proof that the villa was still in my name. They thought I was broken, powerless, too old to fight back. They thought wrong. I had spoken quietly with a lawyer I trusted, an old friend who remembered the sweat and blood I poured into buying that land decades ago. Every paper was still signed under me. My son had no legal claim to give it away. The betrayal was his, but the law, for once, was on my side. The first twist came when I sent them an official eviction notice, sealed and stamped, carried by a courier they didn't expect. I imagined their laughter when they opened it, probably tossing it aside, thinking I was bluffing. But I wasn't bluffing. I was baiting. I watched from a distance as they threw a grand party a week later, acting as though nothing could touch them. That was when the second twist unfolded. Along with the sheriff and court officers, I arrived at the gates with papers in hand. My son's wife's father marched up, red-faced and arrogant, shouting, "This is our home. Who do you think you are?" And I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I am the man who built it, and tonight you're nothing but trespassers." The silence that followed was thick, cut only by the shuffle of officers moving past him. My son came stumbling out, his face pale, his voice shaking. "Dad, you can't do this. You wouldn't." But he trailed off when he saw the legal documents shoved in his trembling hands. His wife shrieked, "Tell him it's ours, tell him!" He muttered, broken, "It was never ours." And that was the moment I knew the knife of reality had finally cut him. Still, I wasn't finished. The third twist was personal. I had recorded every conversation, every arrogant declaration they made about how the villa rightfully belonged to them, how I was too old and useless to matter anymore. With a calm smile, I released those recordings to every neighbor, every family member, every friend who had once respected my son. Within hours, whispers turned to gasps, and gasps to condemnation. Their faces burned with humiliation greater than any eviction notice. The final twist was poetic. I didn't sell the villa. I didn't lock it away. I opened its doors to foster children, to struggling single parents who needed a roof the way I once needed hope. I filled its halls with laughter that wasn't poisoned by greed. When word spread of what I had done, the same people who once praised my son now looked at him with shame, whispering, "He betrayed a man better than he'll ever be." My son stood outside those gates days later, eyes red, begging, "Dad, please. I made a mistake." And I, with the calm of a man reborn, told him, "A mistake is forgetting your keys. You chose betrayal, and now you live with it." Their punishment was complete. No roof, no respect, no sympathy left for them. Only the bitter taste of knowing the man they had tried to erase had risen higher than ever, while they sank into the very pit they dug for me. I remember standing in the empty villa after everything was over, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the marble floors, the same floors I once polished myself when money was tight and I couldn't afford cleaners. And though the house looked the same, the grand windows, the carved woodwork, the chandeliers, it felt completely different, because now it was mine again, not just legally, but spiritually, stripped of the ungrateful hands that had tainted it. And as I walked from room to room, memories rushed back. My son taking his first steps in the hallway, my late wife singing while she set the table, birthdays filled with laughter, even the quiet nights when I worked late just to keep the lights on. And my chest tightened, not in pain, but in something closer to release. Like I had finally wrestled the ghosts of betrayal into silence. I looked at myself in the mirror that hung in the foyer, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a broken old man begging for scraps of love. I saw someone who had endured storms, who had been used, humiliated, dismissed, yet who had refused to die quietly. I saw the strength my wife once admired, the dignity my ancestors would have demanded, the resilience that betrayal tried to strip away, but failed. But don't mistake me for being triumphant. I didn't feel joy in watching my son fall from his pedestal, nor did I smile when his wife's family scattered like rats once the law and their own greed caught up with them. I felt sadness, deep and gnawing, because blood should never betray blood, because a son should never look his father in the eye and say, "It's theirs now," as though years of sacrifice were nothing more than dust. And though I reclaimed my home, I lost the one thing no revenge could return. The image of the boy I raised, the one who once ran to me after scraping his knee, the one who once said I was his hero. That boy was gone, buried under greed, and though I took everything back, I knew I could never bring him back. Still, I found a strange kind of peace in the silence that followed, because for the first time in years, my villa wasn't filled with false laughter, with the smug footsteps of people who thought me weak. It was filled only with truth, with my own breath, my own heartbeat, my own right to exist without being trampled. I started planting again in the garden, the same one I once tended with my wife. And as I pressed seeds into the earth, I whispered to her memory, "It's ours again, love," and I imagined her smiling softly, proud that I didn't let them destroy me. I even opened the villa gates not to my son, but to children from the neighborhood who needed space to play, to friends who respected me, to people who valued kindness over bloodlines. And in doing so, I realized family isn't always about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love freely given, not demanded as a right. And yes, nights are sometimes lonely, and yes, the wound of betrayal still throbs in the quiet hours. But there's dignity in living with truth, and dignity is worth more than 1,000 false smiles from a traitorous son. So here is the lesson, the one I want anyone listening to carve into their hearts. Sacrifice is noble, but blind sacrifice without gratitude becomes a chain that others will use to bind you. Love your children, give them everything you can, but never let them believe they own you or your worth, because when entitlement grows, it devours respect. And remember this, revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means reclaiming what was yours, standing tall when they expect you to fall, refusing to be erased. My son handed my villa away as if I were already dead, but I am alive, stronger than before. And the world now knows one unshakable truth. You can betray my trust. You can wound my heart, but you will never bury me.